the time of avaricious men, lost in their lust for power, baby. Here they come again. They wave the flag and smile to distract us from the truth. But we pay like hell for the lies they tell. The thieves are on the loose. Don't go along with that. Land of the free. That's the way we
Ladies and gentlemen, back again, as you know, and tonight I've got an interesting guest, somebody who has a very interesting life story. And I'm not going to delay it too much because I'm going to introduce him while I can still remember how to pronounce his last name. So we're going to bring on Thomas Mac Aenghais, if I got it close enough. And Thomas is going to regale us with a rather interesting life story. Let me just make sure Thomas is there. Thomas, are you there?
I am, Michael. Nice to meet you this evening.
My pleasure. Thank you so very much for accepting the invitation and coming on. And, you know, one of the things, we get to speak to each other infrequently, but sometimes we get to speak to each other on one of the monthly meetings for people who are involved in this study, nationally and in some cases internationally. I want you to be able to contact the people that host the meetings so you can join us and get to meet many very nice and interesting people who have found this Billy Meier material. So Thomas, tell us a little bit about how and when and where you found Billy Meier's material, please.
It was about 1977 when a friend of mine, who later became a friend, was actually from Bern, Switzerland, and had emigrated here. And he was giving a fireside type presentation on astronomy. And about 3 months later, he introduced me to the Genesis 3 first volume Pleiadian photo album. And that's how I got started with Edward Meier.
And what was your first impression? You get this book and you're looking at these photos and stuff. It's a little, you know, ways back in time. I mean, both you and I found this information and the evidence some time ago. What was your reaction, or what were your thoughts? Do you remember anything about how that impacted you at the time?
Well, I remember staying up all night long reading through the book, and especially some of the references cited there. And because I have a good background in many areas of history and the genre of education, I literally stayed awake most of the night looking at it. I was charged, but that brings up the subject of my early life forms, which caused the excitement to be there. So I have a past history before that of about 25 years younger than that of knowing and looking at UFOs and having a personal friend whose father worked at Area 51. So when I was 6, well, I was in the 6th grade, I guess. I was 12. This friend recounted the Roswell incident, and it was in a grade school class on civics. But the real issues came from reading. And when I was a Cub Scout, I would get the Boys Life magazine, and they would have this monthly article called Tom Swift and His Time Machine. And that was my first introduction to off-world stuff, which I now know later was a lot deeper in my creationary energy history than I had realized then.
So was there something about so-called off-world or extraterrestrial type events or information or theories that was particularly engaging? I mean, given the fact that you were informed about Roswell at an early age, as I was too, how did this tie something together that began right around that time, let's say 12 years of age, or was it was it something that was even in your consciousness at an earlier time?
I suspect it was probably hidden in my subconscious, waiting for it to be awakened through impulses, I guess is the best way to put it. Throughout the teenage years, I had studied NICAP, and which is an organization, and APRO, I think, I'd seen in several magazines. But the Tom Swift series in the boy's life had spaceships in it, UFOs, and they had done a time slip with Tom Swift moving one UFO into multiple entrances using time shift to meet this group of whatever, I can't remember the story, but to meet this group. So instead of just one machine, there was 10 machines there. The thing that happened with the grade school incident with my friend was, I think, triggered by probably the day the Earth stood still from 1951, which I think is very poignantly connected to the Meier way of thinking, and certainly backs it up. But the other things that brought it out were the ancient texts that I had studied up to that time. I had from 1974 up through about 89, and then a break for a while in between 2000 and today. I've read innumerable 20,000 plus texts. And one that stood out was the Book of Enoch, translated by R.H. Charles in 1916 with the Watchers. And then, of course, the Genesis 6 reference to the sons of God seeing daughters of men, that they, wanted wives of them all. But across the studies of the Gita, the Upanishads, finally being awakened in 91, 92 to researching the year of my birth in the Chinese calendar. I have several collections of books on the history of, they called them dragons, but they were mostly in the Irish culture of the Tuatha De Danann. They were descendants to the planet in silvery ships. And of course, the Hopi Indians and the Navajo and the Lakota all have traditions. Part of my history has a rich background in Native American creationary stories. And so my studies included all those.
So how does that mix, let's say, with sci-fi? Did you see something in, let's say, the Native American traditions, any information from Chinese astrology? Did these things correlate in any way? Did you have an association or any kind of concept that things were tied in, that sci-fi wasn't sci-fi all the time, that there was some basis, and that these ancient cultures with their legends and all of that, did that tie in any way, or did you view it as very separate things?
That's an interesting question, Michael. The things that tie the world together have tidbits spread throughout history. And the way my mind has worked is to take all of the various massive amounts of data and do correlations on them. And the more that I had read the current books in English that Edward Meier had written, the more I became of the realization that he had a clearer view and a more direct way of expressing the values there than all the others had put together. But that includes any of the religious works, most of the history of the planet. And there are some other personal things that I don't know if I want to share them, that have to tie with the many personalities he's had on the planet, that I've come to know in an impulse basis, and from my studies find the connections very direct.
Does that have anything to do with, let's say, the ancient philosophers, for instance, is one category, and a very different category than what we would call the the legends and those aspects of indigenous peoples who brought forward imagery and stories and tales that dealt with things that you, of course, have touched upon, but certainly kind of cosmic things. And then we've got this sort of Western philosophical tradition and all. Anything like that part of your background?
If you're asking if it had a philosophical aspect that I could run correlations on, yes. In junior high school, I read every sci-fi, every fiction work of Bradbury, Asimov, Heinlein, literally the whole of the library that was held in that section. So I had this huge database in my mind that functioned more then than it does now. But the ancient texts, the Lao Tse is the way, the Tao, the Gita has several areas. The Irish history, especially more recently, came with it. The ancient texts that I had read when I was a teacher of gospel doctrine in what I call the MCE, of the Mormon Corporate Empire. That research tended to correlate because I was a receiver of the monthly magazine Biblical Archaeology Review. And so as I read through these texts and documents, I began seeing a connection across time and space that became clearer the more I studied, especially with like the books of Jasher, which are part of the Apocrypha, and Isaiah of the Qumran scrolls, which was a little cleaner than King James or the NIV. But the more I did the cross references on them, the clearer things began. But really, one of the favorite two books of Meier's that helped clarify it, which one of them I call the Mechanics Manual of Thinking, the Mach der Gedanken, and the other was the Psyche, which fit right into my years in being married and counseling and what was going on. But the more I asked questions of those who, quote, had the authority, the less they knew and they could not answer. And that was the thing that really struck me, that there were people who were proclaiming things that were their own opinion and not based in anything. And the real reason I do the research is because I want the original closest source on the data. So I really don't take anybody's word for it, including Meier's. If I can't process it and utilize what I've shared with you on the laws of intelligent thought, I wait until I go through that process and can do that.
When you say the laws of intelligent thought, what are you specifically referring to?
When I left the Mormon corporate empire when I was 32, I had started a organization where one of the teachers that I helped put in place gave a lecture on the Aristotelian laws of intelligent thought. And I really didn't make the connection back then, but I knew what those basic four things were. I don't know, it was Chris Endler or someone else that produced the genealogy sheet that everybody can find online of Meier's, both physical genealogy and his creationary energy pathway. I believe it still shows that Aristotle and Socrates both were part of past personalities.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started learning more about Meier in the mid to late 80s and then went through training at Monroe, I figured out that there must be a tie to it. And I had started to use those processes in thinking. And that's really what made the massive leap in intelligence for me.
You just said something and it kind of triggered me, and I'm trying to lock into what it was. Oh gosh. When you speak about, let's say, some of this more ancient philosophical stuff, and then we think about the, religious, what do you call it? The belief systems, the religions, and how they compel, or they want to compel people to accept on the basis of belief things without reasoning through, and giving over the responsibility for their own lives and everything else to these outside forces, imaginary or real, in terms of powers, but like established churches and all. And you've alluded a couple times now to being part of what you called, what was it, the corporate Mormon empire?
Mormon corporate empire.
Mormon corporate empire.
Because that's exactly what it is. It's a corporation. The official name is the Corporation of the President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Oh, it is literally that?
And it's really, that's the name of it. That's the official legal name. And so I just shortened it to Mormon corporate empire. And one of the things that came out in that series of lessons that I started was a meeting that the upper heads of the MCE had when the Smithsonian Institute declared that the scrolls, or the papyri that Joseph Smith had supposedly written about the Egyptian period, that they were the book of breathings. They were not the pearl of great price, which is one of the Mormons' works. And so when I saw that crack in that book of the Mormon hypocrisy, I guess, like you could call it, their standard works, and I started teaching their gospel doctrine for 5 years. I studied all those and began to be really interested in using logic. And so I have one that really kind of broke the dam for me, and they are 2 quotes from the Book of Mormon and 1 from the Bible. The Book of Mormon quote has a fellow named Nephi in 1 Nephi 4, and he's meeting this uncle of his named Laban, and he wants to get the records so his father Lehi can take him when they leave Jerusalem to come to the Americas, quote unquote. And he says, I'm going to kill this guy so that the whole world doesn't dwell in unbelief. Well, you go back further in the Book of Mormon to Ether, which is the name of the book, chapter 8, verses 19 and 20, it says, and it has God speaking, it says, I'm paraphrasing here, I would that man should not shed blood, but from the beginning hath forbidden it, which of course takes out crucifixion, takes out blood sacrifice, takes out all of this. But the interesting part of the connection with John 11 in the New Testament was that Caiaphas, the Sanhedrin chief, said it's better that one man died than a whole nation dwindle in unbelief. And those same exact words Joseph Smith used in Nephi. Well, I had shared that with a econ professor of mine, and he created a real mess. When the Mormon missionary boys would come visit him, he would start quoting those 2 and ask them to explain their logic in the matter. And that's wherein the laws of intelligent thought really have sway. Because you have first the law of identity, which we identify an apple as an apple, or green as a color green, or the moon as a planetary body. And then the second one is the law of non-contradiction, which means a thing cannot be true and false at the same time. There may be time periods where something is factual, and there'll be time periods when it is not. And the third one is the law of excluded middle. The best way to do that, I'm going to bring this page up, is the law of excluded middle has, if I find the early part of it, it says, states that for every proposition, either this proposition or its negation is true. It is called one of the 3 laws of thought, and that's in Wikipedia under law of excluded middle. Anybody can look that up. When you run into data, and this fits with anything you read, I don't care who wrote it, and it's the reason why I continue to study the Meier material, because it doesn't violate the law of excluded middle. It doesn't violate the law of identity. It certainly follows the law of calculation, which I haven't discussed yet, which calculation comes from geometry. There can only be one line between two separate points. There can be only one plane through separate points, and there can be only one time space through four separate points. And in any equation where one of those variables is incorrect, means there's something at fault with that equation. Well, now you take that back to history, and you take it whether it's Mormon corporate history or Native American history and its troubles with the United States Congress and the rapes and murders from the different religious organizations. One of the major big ones, both the big ones we spoke of, and the bigger one in the East, but that enabled me to say, well, it can't be true because it violates these basic laws of intelligent thought. And when I got through reading the Mach de Gedanken, I realized that because I'm a mechanic, a master mechanic at art, I realized that his clear expression and explanation was the most refined part of thinking that one could have. And of course, with the psyche, the same is also true, that if you really want to find the value of your own efforts, then you must know and master your own psyche. I could get into nitty-gritty detail. The best part about the study process is that I got the original sources that I can quote to people and they go look for themselves. The interesting part of my history was that in 1988, I had received something, I'll send you a copy later. Having studied things that were not true gave me the basis to find things that were. And Meier speaks of this regularly about you must understand the whole, and you must be able to be, I call it universal equilibrium, but I think they call it something else in his wording. Figu calls it something different, but it's basically being balanced.
Equalized.
Equalized, yeah, that's the word, equalized.
One of the items that you seem to hit upon, I would say, when you were speaking about seeing green is green and what have you, Meier talks about one of the foundational principles in the teaching is to see things as they really are. And that's quite a trick these days when you take into account how much deception there is in terms of the eyes are fooled and the ears are fooled and all sorts of things by virtue of deep fakes and AI and what have you. So, some people might use, let's say, the word that we don't use, the word for the psyche or the soul is a term that is an inaccurate term because it refers to the psyche. Well, we've got the idea here of seeing things as they are. We've got the idea of complete self-responsibility. We have the psyche as opposed to the soul. Wherein are values and morals and those qualities in the work that you have left, and how do you view it if those things are present in the study of the Meier material? I'm kind of trying to put that thought together. I don't know if it came across clearly or not.
I can quote another phrase from Socrates. It's called, to misuse a word is to corrupt one's own psyche. The word translated is soul, but in more accurate data, language is in the specificity of it being written for this time period in High German versus English or other words, other languages that don't accurately express ideas accurately. To answer your question is the use of the word and its application, whether it's emotion, whether it's psyche, whether it's moral, it's based on the individual's understanding of that definition. The problem exists in when communicating, people do not express sufficiently up front the language that they are using, which is why English is such a poor language to describe creationary principles. And it's much easier to go out and play in the dirt and plant flowers and trees and grow stuff and have nature teach you than to listen to a philosophy teacher, which in the areas of study, I've studied philosophy, history, law, geology, geography, native peoples, native histories, off-world histories I can get my hand on. And the use of the laws of intelligent thought have been a constant sift for me in accepting the way people say things before I let them enter into my thought processes. We're all responsible for the things we choose to do. Most people don't know that they're responsible for that, because there's an interesting principle of creation that I have found, and that is that what you do in creation will be allowed to be done to you, which is a kind of a paraphrase of a New Testament thing, do unto others as you be done by. So if you use the word morals on something, you have to define it much plainer than that. If you use the word psyche, you have to define what that is. And over here to my side here are the death, life, reincarnation cycle, and other world pieces. There is the human consciousness PowerPoint that I use, and the science process model in toroid form. The step-by-step every person must go through, and they must take personal responsibility for, is the comprehension and understanding of what language is and what is inferred. And by following my own prime directive, which I wrote in 1988, it basically says, because of what we know, we should only respond to others outside of us, not in a preaching format. What's the word, the religious word for it?
Proselytizing?
Yeah, proselytizing, that, but that and the actual sending out of missionaries. If a person asks you a question, then it is the rule of creation that you may expound upon it based upon your learning, and then they can choose for themselves. But if you go to express something to a person and they haven't asked about it, you're going to meet the psyche resistance of every person. And that's the hardest part about the Mormon corporate empire that Mormons have, and that is they must learn to shut up and listen. And they don't know how to do that. They can only tell you what they believe is true, not what they know is true.
Wouldn't you say that is also a characteristic of many people in many belief systems or religions?
Oh yes.
You know,
Yes,
go ahead.
Politics and everything.
Yeah, you know, one of the operating principles of life, certainly one of the great immutable laws of the universe, is cause and effect. And I have, in looking at, very cursory because I'm not a scholar of religion at all, but I have found that the so-called golden rule and what you were just speaking about a moment ago seems to be one of the manifestations of expression of the law of cause and effect. It's like when you're being told in a religious sense, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. It really should be more like, you know, the law of the pendulum. What goes out comes back, and all of that. And I've often thought that if in a religion, like if in Christianity, if they had based the whole thing on do unto others and lived with that, it could have been a nice philosophical group that would have violated no fundamental values and morals and laws of creation in the progression and the falsification of the original teaching. But I guess that was not to be.
Well, there's one part of the religious philosophy that I can correct its definition on, and that's the word grace. Grace is defined by them as something not earned, but given. They say some sky daddy or tin man deals in it, but in reality, the creation energy which we are formed of, I have found a personal awareness of in that it allows me to choose and not immediately slap me with a big paddle for doing the wrong one. It allows me to figure out what was incorrect about it and then change that process. But if I don't change the process, then I am missing out on the tool that would eliminate its effect on me.
Now,
that's one of the big lessons of cause and effect, is if you don't know the causes, and in my lean training called a breakdown analysis, if you don't do the analysis of the cause and effect and you express an opinion that has elevated energy or emotion, then you don't do yourself or the other person any good.
Yes.
I do that because I've messed that up enough.
Who hasn't? Now, the only thing I would comment on is the sense that the universe per se does or doesn't do anything to or with or for or against us, but that it is our own proceeding through thought, feeling, action, that we either find ourselves in accordance with the universal laws and the natural state of, we call it, people say, oh, grace or blessings or this, that, and the other thing, simply that when we are flowing with those universal laws, I'd say not all the time do we experience, great joy and harmony and all that, because sometimes that law that allows us to make mistakes is there so that we tumble a bit like a stone in a jeweler's thing, so that we get a little bit polished, but that it's very neutral. It's nothing in any sense personal about any person. So in the New Age stuff, people are always talking about the universe did this, the universe wants me to do that, and the universe told me. It's still like in that sense, it's an offshoot of religious thinking, where there is some outside force that is observing and monitoring and either bestowing on one a nice pat on the head or a slap across the whatever, when really we, as Billy says, we are the smiths, the forgers of our own destiny. And it's through that process of cause and effect that begins thought, feeling, thought, action, that we encounter these things that we then view as favorable. We like or dislike things. And it does take a lot of study and work and discipline to view with neutrality the highs as well as the lows, and to somehow, like you brought up the word before, to be equalized in our life, in our thinking, in our responses, in our actions. So a very different thing is the creation energy teaching than the beliefs and the religions of the world that, as you said, have a sky daddy, somebody up there, with a little wand or a tennis racket slapping us around. What would you say would be, if you have at this point a favorite aspect of the teaching or anything that you're particularly focused on right now?
Well, at this new book that's come out called Death, Rebirth, and Dying Process, I've tried to narrow down, haven't found it yet, but I'm reading into it and I'm processing it slowly. But you mentioned several things that triggered the thought processes and the lean mind, which is one of my specialties when I was in manufacturing. Each of those things you discussed are the use of the fallacy of the incorrect law of identity. And again, it boils back to Socrates: to misuse a word is to corrupt one's own soul. The interesting part about that is that for me, there was a book published by, it's called the Biology of Belief.
Mhm.
And in it, Lipton, I was trying to think of his name. Bruce Lipton describes as a medical researcher what's happens to us in our physiology when we do such things. And rather than export cause and effect outside of oneself, understanding what it does to the physical self and therefore to the mental self and to the emotional self has much more effect and is much closer to the individual if they don't use a language that is something that's away from them, but instead of the language they are part and parcel of. All the people who think of the sky daddies and faith and prayer and so forth, they're on their pathway to learning. And I have found that the creationary force in each one of them will, at the appropriate moment, when they're ready to listen, when they're tuned in, or as Meier says, when they're swinging waves or harmonized, then they will learn that what they were talking about, as all of us have, is incorrect and we're more refined in it. That's the process that my training and education away from the Meier material has given me as a binaural view on things. I learned things from others' commentary before I read, and I've read every one in English. It's been translated in English of Meier's works. But the interesting part about it, I have found, and I suppose if I can accurately get as close to my evolution as possible, and that is to say, that is contained in the DNA of ourselves. And when I look at the giving myself the patience to learn and grow, and I don't take punishments and rewards, which means I would throw out the Mormons' first, second, and third article of faith and their 10th one right out the door because it's just crap. And most of the Muslim and the Christian and the Catholic and the Protestants and even the Eastern religions, they don't focus on the responsibility of self. And everything I read from Edward Meier comes to the point of, if you understand what I'm just telling you now, and I'll use his words and use my own voice, then you will understand the pathway you must choose. And you don't let anybody else choose it for you. You must choose it for yourself, which means if you don't ponder, which I think what meditation helps people do, if you don't educate yourself, if you can't do a breakdown analysis of, when really following the laws of intelligent thought, a breakdown analysis, man, material, machine, and methodology, those four things really can describe what you're doing and feeling. Now, Lipton points out that feelings are based in DNA expressions and disharmony away from the creationary equalizedness. The logic process for me enables me to not always change immediately, but to identify the processes that I must do and not beat myself up for the things that I don't know how to do. My children will all give you the examples of their dad being involved in religious horseshit. And to this day, sometimes because I care, my grandkids and my kids, I care about them. I want to tell them about things I know. And really, it's none of my business. And I've told my youngest the other day that that was something I wish I could have eliminated earlier. But growing up in the inculcation of religious crap and assigning something outside of yourself as the punisher and the leader really has done a disservice to our DNA as far as progressing down through our next generations. Because if we don't evolve ourselves, there's no way to pass that on genetically. And so my studies have been around understanding the genetics, running into instances where I found former personalities, or probable, I put it this way, highly probable, high degree of confidence. And there's some interesting insights that came from that. I think he used the word impulse. And to me, impulse is something that is a result of harmonizing your swinging waves with your subconscious so that it brings it to your consciousness. And then the experiences of life teach you, and I've had a couple of those. If you want to share them on the program, I don't know. I've actually seen off-world forms, so it's not a matter of who's doing what, because there's about 15 or 20 different realms of people screwing with this planet and have over the years. So take that from there.
A whole potential show about that, of course. We can look at, I just want to say before we wrap it up here, that what you were just talking about and how your experiences with your children, what took you time to learn I think about my own experience raising my daughter. I was a single dad and raised my kid from infancy on up. And at a certain point, probably about 10 or 12, she said something to me, which really, it was like it stopped me in my tracks. And she had to say it a few times. It was a few different circumstances before I really got the importance of it. And that was simply, don't tell me what to do. And it was not in defiance of these are your chores and all that kind of a thing. It had something to do with where that intersection of a young person taking and knowing self-responsibility and not allowing anybody, including their effectively, singular parent, to override that emerging self. And I did a lot of little things consciously along the way of holding myself back subsequent so that I did not inhibit, and even to allowing, I'm sure, excesses when a person starts owning their power, allowing some excesses in a little bit of self responsibility / defiance for the sake of not squashing that, sense of I will create my own destiny. Thank you very much. So as parents, you and I, and I'm sure other people who have gone through all sorts of things trying to raise children according to the traditions of the time, the culture, a belief system, what have you, and coming face to face to confront the reality of when the essence of a person calls out, and if and when we do grasp, wait a minute, and hold ourselves, discipline the self so that we can properly discipline and guide the emerging self of the child. So just some thoughts on that. Would anything you want to leave us with for this show? And we'll probably be doing some more talk about the other life forms and views of them, etc.
They only come from my history, and I think I got in the time before last area group meeting, they stayed afterwards, and for about 40 minutes I bent their ears for a while. I kind of wondered if I should have done that. The way I look at my path is, if what comes after me produces something I would consider positive, then I made a valuable choice. And if what comes after me causes me to, I really screwed that one up, didn't I? And immediately I said, well, that just means you're not as evolved as you thought you was, and you go on your own way. The interesting part about me that I'm really intrigued about is a little building they must have over there in Smith Rudy called the Sohar. I don't know if you run into it when you were there or not, but I read through the contact reports, and I had Wendell Stevens' early translations of some of the early ones, the volumes that came out printed in hardback on typewritten pages. And so I have those in my past. But you know, you mentioned once earlier that wouldn't it be nice if I took a trip over there, and if I could afford to do it and survive the trip and not get ill from other people being on the plane and all that crap. I would like to do that because there is something that I ran across, I think it was in CR 39, about those who wanted to be part of the continuation of the mission had to go through this process to be born in that area. You know, the data is out there if people want to study it. They have to pick and choose their own stuff. You had a fellow on last time or 2 times ago that Derek, that I thought was very highly intelligent in the way he was expressing things. And so I think there's a lot of people on here who have unique pieces to be involved, but sometimes sharing the uniqueness, and I'm very oblique with that term, of the pathway that each of us has walked makes others feel like they were less, kind of like that group that visited in 10,000 or 1000 AD who visited, took back the monks' teaching on Christianity back to their planet, and then they ended up destroying their worlds. So part of that process, I think, is wise direction from Meier material to not do that. And so I hesitate. After you quit recording, I might like to share a few things, but as far as this goes, I think people need to take the pathway serious. The Goblet of Truth, the ones that have been posted online, especially in chapter 22 and chapter 23, have really poignant directions on individual self-choice. So I would simply encourage all of those to, if they haven't started anywhere, start there and then go out and screw up, because you're going to figure it out real quick.
Well, thank you very much. I will, because you just mentioned it. You mentioned Wendell Stevens' original, translations. So Wendell Stevens' books that you mentioned, we have just gotten permission from Billy Meier to put up the downloadable versions of Wendell's books. I asked Billy for that permission because those books, while there are translations in there that are mistranslations of what Meier said, the important thing is that quite literally, those books contain, since they're copyrighted and we know when they were published, they contain information that it constitutes a legal and scientific standard of proof, not only for space travel, but for time travel. And I have just tonight put up a blog with the first mention of those books, and I'm going to keep letting people know so people can get either Wendell's 4 volumes that way, or they can also get them with his 2 in what do you call it, preliminary, investigative, and supplementary.
Right. Supplemental and preliminary.
Right. So all of this is now available again, and we'll be talking more about that in shows to come. So I must bid you adieu, because I've got to capture this so that I can put it out for everybody. And I thank you, despite the technical problems that came about. Your patience is appreciated. And we will speak again shortly. And I thank everybody who has tuned in and who's had a chance maybe to meet you through this presentation. And I look forward to hearing and seeing what people have had to say, because I think they maybe will have a number of comments from you and all. You'll have a link to this, and we'll forward if any questions come in. So for tonight, to everybody, I say thank you very much, Thomas, and for all concerned, be safe and serene and Salome.
They can't explain how things have gotten bad. Drugs and crime are on the climb, so they hide behind the flag. They'll trash the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. There's nowhere to hide if they decide to kick in your door. all tonight. Don't go along with that. The land of the free, that's the way we give away our liberty. First will be the flag, then what you can eat and drink. Next will be your attitude, what you say, hear, feel, and think. Then before you know it, you're a number without a name.